Chauvin guilty on all charges. What are your thoughts? Genuinely honest legal question here. How do you get charged for second and third degree murder and manslaughter? I always thought since they're all different levels you'd pick the one that applies. Basically my question is, why is manslaughter even there when second degree is much worse anyway, and why still use all three and convict on all three? I'm kinda surprised. I thought they'd nail him for manslaughter and third degree murder, but I didn't think they'd get second degree murder to stick. Keep filming the police people. It was because of Darnella Frazier filming that brought police brutality to the public stage and started many calls for police reform. He was a bad cop and deserved it. Hopefully this will give other bad cops a reason to pause and wonder if they will be the next Chauvin. Might stop them from doing something reckless. Smartphones might be the cause of people not interacting face-to-face, but are a brilliant way of capturing injustices. I am extremely surprised, I'll admit, after watching closing arguments and bits and pieces of the trial. I believe the manslaughter charge was likely. It seemed there could be reasonable doubt on the murder charges, and I expected those to be an issue for the jury. I was shocked when both of the murder charges came through. If someone has a history of concussions and I hit them in the head with a baseball bat and kill them, I don't get to say they died because of their history of concussions. I'm glad the jury realized that. I believe that justice has carried the day. Though this is not the end, there is still an urgent need for police reform, for our sake as citizens and their sake as officers of the law. We need civilian oversight, no more officers investigating themselves. We need mandatory body cams that are always recording. The technology is there to store a set amount of time, such as an hour before a button is pushed, which will save the set amount of time before the push and everything after it. Officers will not have to remember to push it immediately. They will have an hour, or more depending on the system, to remember. We need mental health services in this country desperately, better training for officers, and better pay too. We can't expect to pay them poverty wages and get the best of the best. It's fact. Unfortunately, we need a culture change. It was weird as an outsider, Irish, to have a 10-minute video of a police officer killing someone by kneeling on their neck, and for there to even be a debate about whether that was the cause of death. I also don't understand how it can be so divided that people are willing to defend this behavior just to get one up on the other side. I don't know much about murder laws in Minnesota, but I'm surprised they got anything beyond manslaughter. Manslaughter is when you do something wrong that results in someone's death. That seems appropriate here. Murder requires intent, but I guess the fact that he had 9 minutes to think about it tipped it over into murder. Glad he got something at least. I bet he relives that situation every day in his head. And some little part of him, at the time, was saying maybe get off this guy, but he just kept insisting on being the tough guy in charge. Good riddance. There is no space in society for people who can't stop themselves from literally killing another human being just to try to send a message or establish dominance, and any bootlicking morons who want to tell me he was doing the right thing can just save your time. Learn to think for yourself. I thought they would get him for manslaughter and he'd get 5 to 6 years. I think the fact that they got him on the other charges despite having no evidence to prove it is a complete failure of our justice system. Furthermore, I don't think for 1 second he received a fair trial. The president and a congressman both commenting on it, and all the rioters getting ready to burn down the city if he wasn't found guilty. I bet the jurors were just afraid that their names would get out and the rioters would burn their houses down if they don't vote to convict. He's going to get 40 years. He will be lucky if he makes it 2 in prison before he gets stabbed. His wife deserted him. All his co-workers deserted him. His captain, his police chief, Everyone around him deserted him and now he will spend the rest of his life in prison. If I were him I'd just hang myself. There is nothing for him to look forward to other than misery. The same day this verdict comes out, a 15-year-old girl gets shot and killed by police in Ohio. All this talk and statements of this is a major step forward from politicians is a bunch of bullshit. Chauvin's nothing but a sacrificial lamb. Shit isn't changing. Although manslaughter for sure, maybe third degree. But I'm also sure that if it goes to appeal he will be acquitted or put up for retrial. Maxine Waters, representative for California, turning up and demanding a guilty verdict during lockdown. Moronic people doxing one of the witnesses' old homes and covering it in pig's blood because they thought he still lived there. Basic witness intimidation. Be lucky if any of this sticks in the appeal. Was genuinely surprised by murder too though. Honestly surprised it wasn't pushed into a mistrial, with the protests, political figure comments, especially Waters and Biden's remarks, and everything that's occurred. I'm genuinely surprised it didn't go for a mistrial, though the judge threatened it a few times. This case will likely get picked up and appealed just due to the circumstances surrounding all of this. We all knew the manslaughter charge would stick, and maybe the third-degree murder, but second-degree murder. I was genuinely shocked they found him guilty. Edit, grammar, clarification. Using an out for obvious reasons, I feel like he didn't get a fair trial. At the beginning of the trial the jury admitted to the judge they were worried about their safety. Now, with the riots the last week or so, how could they not find him guilty? They must have been terrified that they would be targeted and attacked if they didn't convict. Couple that with comments from Maxine Waters and it's a wonder it took so long to come up with the verdict. He was convicted the second rioters set fire to the city. I don't see a way the jury wasn't poisoned by current events. I have no trust in the U.S. justice system. I believe he was found guilty on all charges in order to be able to deliver positive remarks, talk as if everything is done and dusted and there will be punishment for those who do it again blah blah. I also believe that his sentence is going to be short just because the euphoria will have subsided by the time the sentence is read. Most importantly though, if he was found not guilty there would be a lot more riots because the whole country was following the trial. The government does not need that. Glad I'm from MN and police being accountable for their behavior matters. They convicted Mohammed Nir for killing Justine Diamond. We should always hold cops accountable for excessive behavior. That includes our newest issue with Right. Hold police accountable, that's it. Whatever the verdict was, I'm getting tired of the public and media playing judge, jury and executioner outside the courtroom. It just feels riddled with mob mentality and social justice which don't belong in court. They don't belong in the courtroom. One thing that sets us apart from other countries is presumption of innocence, and we shouldn't take that for granted. I hope it brings some amount of peace to the Floyd family after a year from hell. Until municipal funding starts going to poverty reduction and services to reduce crime, instead of retroactive punishment that has utterly failed to make our neighborhoods more livable, then unfortunately I don't think anything will fundamentally change on a societal level. As a Brit looking at the US from the outside, I believe your law enforcement and police officers are as aggressive and brutal as they are due to the fact that every citizen they have an encounter with has the potential to be carrying a deadly weapon such as a gun, as your constitution allows you to. Is this a fair comment or am I way off the mark? You guys realize if the jury was that intimidated they would have told the judge and got themselves removed from this, right? They literally had 2 stand-ins in case someone broke the rules or needed to drop. This theory is bullshit. The jury sat in court for weeks looking at evidence and hearing testimonies. It's really not that shocking they would think Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck killed him. We all saw it happen. Most of us don't need the media, riots, or anyone to influence our minds to realize that was murder. Controversial, I know, but I don't think this was a fair trial. I mean, you have our politicians threatening political violence, and these jurors' names will be public one day. I think the pighead was a message to them as well. I do think he should be guilty of something. It just doesn't sit right with me when people say this was a fair trial, or there is no way the jury felt threatened. No matter what side you are on, you can't honestly say he had a fair trial. He didn't stand a chance, especially with the insane media coverage and the threat of rioting that was going to happen if he was found not guilty. We all know that if it was not guilty, there would be looting and violence in the streets right now. The fact that the jury deliberated in so little time, asked no questions about anything, and returned a guilty verdict on all charges, including the completely contradictory second and third-degree murder charges, as the crowd outside chanted "Burn it down," says it all. This might have been a manslaughter case, maybe a wrongful death civil suit, but there were too many other mitigating factors to find second-degree murder beyond reasonable doubt. I also think Eric Nelson presented a shitty defense. I think he should be guilty of something, but it's amazing how you cannot comply with simple requests from cops, have that much drugs in your system, complain you can't breathe in the cop car, because of the drugs which led to him not being in the car, and die a hero. I don't see how Waters isn't being blamed by everyone after the Capitol attack. Really gives this whole thing a double standard feel. I want to be more into this movement because there's a lot of truth to it, but defund the police is a huge turnoff, and when you want to scrap with cops when you're running with a gun, or going to a car where you said there was a knife, I don't feel bad when bad things happen. This makes me unpopular on both sides, and the public on both sides ignore a lot of science in these situations. But overall, yeah, you can kneel on a guy for 9 fucking minutes and not go to jail. No way the charges don't get appealed. No way people remember long enough to pursue the issue. There was never a fair chance at trial due to the social media hype and fear of retribution. Even a representative said if he isn't found guilty, get more confrontational. This will benefit his appeal. Furthermore, there is significant evidence that the victim could breathe, namely the fact that he could still speak and the fact that he didn't die on scene. Anyone who has actually been choked knows you can't speak. The position was certainly a stressor which contributed to his death, but it would not have done so to an otherwise healthy person. It's a case of involuntary manslaughter, where intent to harm and disregard for well-being caused unintentional death, and the over-prosecution and eagerness to celebrate will see him relieved of this conviction. So happy about the verdict, worried about an appeal, hoping this doesn't happen. Hearing he will likely get 12.5 years as a sentence as a prediction. Is that enough? I am going to get downvoted into oblivion for this. But Lane and the other dude commented about recovery position, he has no pulse, worried about text, etc. They were both rookies that were challenging the senior officer. I am curious what will happen with these two officers since they were accomplices, but appeared to have an ounce of critical thinking. Tao was more aggressive, and they are charging the three together. What happens with them? I think you have to bear in mind, Floyd was already in handcuffs when Chauvin arrived at the scene. Even if we buy claims that Floyd was struggling with officers, he did not pose a threat to anyone. I think 2 different medical examiners now have also said that the cause of his death was definitely being physically deprived of air, not a fentanyl overdose, though it may have contributed somewhat since the drug can cause your chest to stiffen up. You have to remember though, George Floyd was not a small man, and he had a tolerance built up already. The amount found in his blood was clearly not enough to cause an overdose in his case. Because of those factors, there are still people out there actively searching for any excuse to blame Floyd. but none of their arguments hold up to scrutiny. Some of these excuses are pretty disgusting, pretty much insinuations that because he had opioids in his system, he deserved it. Even if he ate all he had when the cops showed up, he didn't. And we don't fucking live in the Judge Dredd universe. I'm concerned that the verdict wasn't decided based on a lack of reasonable doubt but instead based on incendiary comments basically threatening jurors made by lawmakers and the violence that erupted over the summer. In a case as volatile as this, I worry there's no such thing as an impartial jury since the jurors feared that their decision would lead to more violence. I could be wrong, but I can't fathom the fact that Floyd had 3x the lethal dose of fentanyl in his body after he died and little to no damage to his windpipe, and that wasn't reasonable doubt that he was murdered. I'm surprised he actually got convicted, which is sad because he obviously does deserve it, but all of us were expecting him to get off because of a failed system. I was also very surprised to read he had a record of police brutality and more than 15 complaints against him. We cannot forget that although this time the system worked, there is still a lot to do to fix a broken system. I was surprised. I didn't expect more than manslaughter, but I'm extremely glad he got hit with murder too and it stuck. I feel two things. One, police should not longer be given a "well, I was doing my job" and hiding behind their badge for when they are working. Even then they do their job so poorly they literally kill a man. And two, police should be aware that there are finally consequences for such gross negligence. I was surprised. I didn't expect more than manslaughter, but I'm extremely glad he got hit with murder too and it stuck. I feel two things. One, police should not longer be given a "well, I was doing my job" and hiding behind their badge for when they are working. Even then they do their job so poorly they literally kill a man. And two, police should be aware that there are finally consequences for such gross negligence. Seems fair. I mean, I'm the last person to just assume cops are looking for ways to kill black people, but yep, it was definitely unnecessary and aggravated. All I can say is perhaps Chauvin just had so much adrenaline going he didn't realize what he was doing to Floyd. Or maybe he did in fact just want to kill him, which makes this verdict all the more appropriate. But either way, there was no way Chauvin wasn't gonna catch a conviction for something. Now, if only that race-baiting ass Maxine Waters could be held accountable for her shameful actions around this case. I'm surprised they got him on anything past manslaughter. I think he was definitely guilty, but him also. And I know I'll take a beating in down votes, but whatever. Not really sure that he got a fair trial. And I'm also a bit surprised it wasn't deemed a mistrial. Whether you agree or disagree with the verdict, it can absolutely be called into question whether or not the jury was unbiased, and whether or not we had public elected officials interfering with the trial and potentially intimidating jurors. Cough. Maxine Waters. Cough. I think manslaughter for sure, and you could have probably convinced me either way on murder charges. But I don't think it was a fair trial at all, and despite what outcome you wanted, that should bother you. I'm relieved the Floyd family got justice, but this changes nothing in the eyes of America. Conservative media is already agreeing with the verdict but concluding that Chauvin was an outlier and not an example of the issues with policing in America. On Fox News they are already saying literally that there is no systemic racism in American policing. If it wasn't for camera phones, I am certain Chauvin would have walked. He murdered a man in front of a crowd and the video was watched the world over, and he still pleaded not guilty to the charges. I've never heard of a guy getting caught on camera in broad daylight murdering a guy and that guy still pleading not guilty. Anyone else curious to know how a completely unbiased jury could have been selected? Not to say the jurors didn't do their job correctly and faithfully, I'm sure they did, but I've been wondering this since the subject has been on everyone's mind for the past 24 hours. Whether the jurors were biased for or against Chauvin doesn't really interest me. What does interest me is the fact that in such a high-profile case, it's almost a certainty that all jurors have had some exposure to it already. It's been in the news cycle since midsummer last year, meaning, even if the jurors faithfully avoided the news during court proceedings, they have probably already formed their biases on the case. Is there a way around in this future scenarios? You'd almost have to select jurors from a pool of ignorant foreigners to have foolproof voir dire. Hell, I bet even the Amish have been gossiping about this case since last summer.